Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The coin purse felt lighter than my future as I counted the contents for the third time. 50 silver coins, everything I had left after the rejection, after the whispers, after watching my former pack celebrate a mating ceremony that should have included me. The cabin smelled of wet earth and forgotten years when I first pushed open the warped wooden door. Moss crept along the window frames like green fingers reaching inward, and somewhere in the walls, something skittered away from the sudden intrusion of afternoon light. The real estate agent, a beta with kind eyes and pitying smiles, had called it rustic and full of potential. What she meant was, this is all a rejected Omega with 50 coins can afford. I stepped inside, my boots leaving prints in the dust that had settled like snow over every surface. The air tasted of decay and pine, of things that had lived here long before me, and would likely remain long after. My wolf stirred uneasily beneath my skin, sensing something I couldn't quite name. Not danger, exactly, but presence. It's perfect, I'd told the agent, because it was far enough from the Clearwater Pack territory that I wouldn't have to smell Sebastian on the wind. Far enough that I wouldn't have to watch him mark Vanessa at the next full moon gathering, wouldn't have to feel the pack bond fray and snap like rotted rope as they all chose to stand with their future alpha, rather than the Omega he'd discarded. The rejection had been public, efficient. Sebastian had stood before the entire pack during the Harvest Festival, my hand in his, and I'd actually thought he was going to complete the bond. Instead, he'd announced that an alpha of his standing required a mate of substantial strength and bearing. Vanessa had stepped forward then, her red hair catching firelight, her wolf radiating dominance that made every Omega in the gathering lower their eyes, everyone except me. I'd looked Sebastian in the face and watched something flicker there. Regret, maybe, or just discomfort at having to do his duty publicly. Then I'd turned and walked away before the tears could come, before the humiliation could root itself so deep I'd never dig it out. That was 3 months ago. Now I stood in a cabin that leaned slightly to the left, with a stone fireplace that looked older than the territory disputes, and I tried to feel something other than hollow. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, the last thing she'd said before the fever took her. Sometimes the strongest thing an Omega can do is survive without a pack. We bend, little one, but we don't break. I'd been bending for 23 years. I was ready to see if I could stand straight. The cabin had 3 rooms, a main living space with the fireplace, a small bedroom barely big enough for the iron frame bed left behind, and a kitchen with a pump that groaned and spat rust-colored water when I tested it. The floorboards creaked a language all their own. And when night fell, the forest outside came alive with sounds that made my Omega instincts scream to find a pack, find safety, find someone stronger to hide behind. But there was no one. Just me. A cabin that cost 50 coins, and whatever lived in the forest that even the Clearwater wolves wouldn't hunt in. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the territory had heard about the dead woods, the stretch of forest that began just past the old property markers, where trees grew too close together, and the canopy blocked out the sky even at midday. Wolves who ventured too deep came back changed, if they came back at all. Some returned speaking in riddles. Others stopped speaking entirely, their eyes fixed on something only they could see. Most didn't return at all. The cabin sat on the very edge of the dead woods. The agent had mentioned it casually, as if the proximity to a place of local legend might actually be a selling point, rather than a warning. Peaceful, she'd said. No one will bother you out here. She was right about that, at least. My first night, I built a fire with wood I found stacked against the cabin's north wall, gray and brittle with age, but still burning hot enough to chase the October chill from the room. I ate dried meat from my pack and tried not to think about pack dinners, about long tables filled with food and laughter, and the safety of being surrounded by people who knew your name. The wind picked up after midnight, howling through gaps in the walls I hadn't noticed during the day. It sounded almost like voices, low and urgent, speaking a language that sat just at the edge of understanding. My wolf paced restlessly inside me, torn between fear and curiosity. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the porch, heavy and deliberate, crossing from one end to the other, then stopping directly in front of the door. My heart climbed into my throat. I hadn't seen another soul since the agent left me here yesterday morning. The nearest pack territory was miles away, and no wolf traveled alone through the dead woods at night. Not if they valued their sanity. The footsteps moved again, not away, but around the cabin, circling slowly. Testing. I pressed myself against the wall beside the fireplace, grabbing the iron poker with hands that shook despite my best efforts to steady them. The fire cast dancing shadows across the room, making it impossible to see clearly, turning every corner into a potential threat. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in like a living thing, broken only by the snap and hiss of burning wood. I counted my heartbeats, 30, 40, 50, before I dared to move toward the window. The glass was so dirty I had to wipe a circle clear with my sleeve. And even then, I saw nothing but darkness and the vague shapes of trees. But I felt watched. Every Omega instinct I possessed screamed that something was out there, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to the fireplace, the poker across my lap, and watched the door until gray light finally crept through the windows and the forest sounds shifted from night hunters to morning birds. When I ventured outside at dawn, I found them, tracks in the soft earth around the cabin. Not wolf prints. These were human feet, bare and large, the impressions deep enough to suggest significant weight. They circled the entire structure, overlapping in places, as if whoever made them had walked the perimeter multiple times. But it was what lay on the porch that made my blood turn cold. A deer carcass, freshly taken, its throat torn out with surgical precision. No struggle in the surrounding dirt, no signs of a chase, just death, delivered and left like an offering or a warning. I should have packed my things then, should have walked back to Clearwater territory and begged Sebastian to let me live on the outskirts of Packland, accept whatever scraps of safety they'd throw to a rejected Omega. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford, not out here alone. But something made me stay. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the bone-deep exhaustion of having nothing left to lose. Or maybe it was the way my wolf had gone suddenly still and attentive when I'd found the deer, not with fear, but with a strange, unsettling interest. I dragged the carcass away from the cabin, far enough that scavengers wouldn't come sniffing around my door, and spent the day reinforcing what I could. I found boards in what might have once been a shed, used rusty nails to cover the worst gaps in the walls. The work kept my hands busy and my mind from spiraling into panic. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, I heard them. Voices in the distance, real ones this time, not wind whispers or imagination. They came from deeper in the dead woods, raised in what might have been argument or celebration. I couldn't tell which. The sound carried strangely through the trees, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. My wolf perked up, ears forward in my mind's eye. Before I could think better of it, before common sense could override curiosity, I found myself walking toward the tree line. The forest swallowed me immediately. One step past the old property markers and the temperature dropped 10 degrees, the light turning gray-green and strange. The trees here were old, their trunks thick as houses, their branches interweaving overhead into a lattice that turned midday into twilight. I'd gone maybe 30 yards when I saw the first mark. It was carved into a massive oak, deep gouges forming a symbol I didn't recognize, 3 lines intersecting through a circle, with smaller marks radiating outward like a dark sun. The wood around it looked scorched, as if the carving itself generated heat. There were more. Every 10 feet or so, another tree bore another mark, each one slightly different, but clearly part of the same system. A boundary, I realized, a warning written in a language older than pack laws. The voices had stopped. The forest had gone completely silent. I turned to head back, every instinct now screaming that I'd made a terrible mistake when I saw him. He stood between two of the marked trees, so still I'd mistaken him for a shadow, but shadows didn't have eyes that caught what little light filtered through the canopy and threw it back like cold fire. Shadows didn't radiate the kind of power that made my Omega Wolf want to simultaneously submit and run. He was tall, taller than any wolf I'd ever seen. His frame speaking of violence held in check through pure will. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, unkempt and wild. But it was his face that held me frozen. Beautiful in the way a winter storm is beautiful. All sharp angles and harsh lines that suggested he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. And his eyes. God, his eyes were the color of new ice, pale and piercing and absolutely, utterly devoid of mercy. An alpha. Not just any alpha, something older, something that made the title seem inadequate. We stared at each other across the failing light, predator and prey, and I waited for him to move, to attack, to do whatever wolves did when Omegas trespassed on their territory. Instead, he spoke, his voice like gravel grinding beneath a glacier. "You're living in the cabin." It wasn't a question. I managed a nod, not trusting my voice. Something crossed his face then, surprise maybe, or recognition. "You accepted the offering, the deer." He'd left the deer. I didn't know it was an offering. I stopped, because I didn't know what I'd thought, and explaining seemed suddenly dangerous. He took a step forward, and I took one back, my body making decisions my mind was too frightened to consider. He stopped immediately, his expression shifting into something I couldn't read. "Don't run," he said quietly. "Nothing in these woods is faster than me, and most of it is much, much worse." The walk back to the cabin felt like traversing a dream where distance meant nothing. He didn't follow, at least not in any way I could detect. But I felt his presence like a weight against my spine, watching, measuring. The marked trees seemed to lean in closer as I passed, their symbols glowing faint in my peripheral vision, gone when I looked directly at them. My hands were still shaking when I barred the door, though I suspected the flimsy wood would do nothing to keep out something like him if he decided to enter. I'd seen alphas before, fought beside them, even dated one who'd rejected me. But Sebastian's dominance had been performative. All swagger and show for the pack's benefit. What I'd felt standing before that creature in the woods was different, ancient. Like facing a force of nature that had simply chosen to wear a wolf's skin for convenience. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I sat by the window and watched the forest, half expecting to see those pale eyes staring back from between the trees. But the darkness remained empty, and when dawn finally broke, I found another offering on the porch. This time it was rabbit, 3 of them, cleaned and prepared, arranged on a flat stone I was certain hadn't been there yesterday. Beside them lay a bundle of herbs tied with dried grass, plants I recognized from my mother's teaching. Sage for protection, yarrow for healing, and something else I couldn't name that smelled of thunderstorms and deep earth. I should have been terrified. Every logical part of my brain insisted this was predatory behavior, the way wolves baited traps. But my Omega instincts hummed with a different frequency entirely, reading the offerings not as threat, but as courtship? No. That was insane. Things that lived in the dead woods didn't court anyone. They consumed, corrupted, drove wolves mad with a glance. I brought the rabbits inside anyway. The meat was good. Better than anything I'd caught on my own during my first weeks of exile. I roasted one over the fire and tried to pretend I wasn't eating food provided by a creature whose name I didn't even know, who'd appeared and disappeared like smoke through the forest. 3 days passed like that. Each morning brought new offerings. Firewood cut to perfect lengths and stacked with military precision. A deer hide scraped clean and soft enough for bedding. Wild mushrooms that I would never have dared harvest myself, but somehow knew were safe. And each evening, as the light failed, I'd feel that presence at the edge of the tree line, watching, waiting, never approaching closer than those marked boundaries. On the 4th morning, I found a note. It was written on birch bark and charcoal, the handwriting sharp and angular. "The pump needs a new seal. There's one in the shed's false floor." I stared at it for a full minute, my mind struggling to reconcile the creature I'd seen with someone who'd leave helpful maintenance tips. But when I checked the shed, really just 3 walls and a roof that listed dangerously to one side, I found the false floor exactly where the note indicated. Beneath it lay not just a pump seal, but tools. A hammer that hadn't seen rust, nails that gleamed like new, rope that would actually hold weight. Someone had maintained this cabin long after it should have fallen to ruin. Someone had kept it ready, as if waiting for it to be needed again. I spent the day making repairs, my hands finding rhythm in the work. The pump seal fit perfectly, and soon I had clear water flowing instead of rust-stained sludge. I patched the roof, reinforced the porch steps, and discovered that beneath layers of grime, the cabin's bones were solid oak, built to withstand far worse than weather. As sunset painted the sky in shades of copper and violet, I made a decision that was either incredibly brave or phenomenally stupid. I walked to the tree line. "I know you're there," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "You've been feeding me for 4 days. The least you can do is tell me your name." Silence answered. The forest held its breath. Then, like shadows coalescing, Rowan. He stepped from between the marked trees, and in better light I could see details I'd missed before. He wore clothes that might have been fine once, dark pants, and a shirt that had seen considerable wear. Everything about him speaking of someone who'd stopped caring about appearance long ago. But it was his face that captured me again. Those sharp, unforgiving features that might have been handsome if they'd ever learned how to soften, and eyes that held centuries of winter. "Rowan," I repeated, tasting the name. It fit him. Solid, unyielding, rooted deep. "I'm Stella." Something flickered in his expression. "I know. How?" But of course he knew. If he'd been leaving offerings, he'd probably been watching long enough to learn everything about me. The thought should have been violating. Instead, it felt oddly secure. "Why?" I asked instead. "Why the cabin, the food, all of it?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my wolf lower her head instinctively. "The cabin was built for Omegas, a sanctuary for those rejected by their packs. It's been empty for 63 years. You've been maintaining it? All this time?" Someone had to. He moved closer, just to the edge of the boundary, and I realized he wouldn't cross those marked trees without invitation. "The forest is dangerous, but not cruel. We protect what seeks protection. We, not I. There are others, 7 of us. Alphas who couldn't or wouldn't integrate into pack society." His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Exiles, some call us. Ferals. The pack leaders call us cursed and tell their wolves to stay away." "Are you?" I asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness. "Cursed, I mean." "Probably. But there was dark humor in it now. The first sign of anything beyond that frozen exterior. Does it matter? I thought about Sebastian's pack, about the Omegas who'd smiled while whispering about my inadequacies, about a community that had chosen hierarchy over compassion. "No," I said finally. "I don't think it does." His eyes caught mine, and for the first time since we'd met, I saw something almost like surprise there. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive, and turned back toward the forest. "Wait," I called after him. "The offerings, do I need to reciprocate somehow? I don't know the customs for whatever this is." He paused, his back still to me. "There are no customs, only choices." Then quieter. "Don't go deeper into the woods, not alone. Not yet." He disappeared between the trees, and I was left with more questions than answers and the unsettling realization that I wanted to see him again. The next week fell into a strange routine. I'd wake to find some new necessity on the porch. Salt, candles, a knife sharp enough to actually cut properly. I'd spend my days working on the cabin, transforming it from shelter to home. And as evening approached, I'd walk to the tree line and talk to the shadows until Rowan emerged. We didn't discuss much at first. He'd ask if I needed anything, I'd thank him for whatever he'd left, and we'd stand in uncomfortable silence until one of us found a reason to leave. But gradually, incrementally, the conversations lengthened. I learned that the 7 exiles lived deeper in the dead woods, in a settlement they'd built from abandoned structures and sheer stubbornness. They hunted, traded with a few brave merchants who didn't mind dealing with ferals, and maintained the marked boundaries that kept the truly dangerous things contained in the forest's heart. What kind of dangerous things? I'd asked. Rowan's expression had gone carefully blank. The kind that make wolves forget they were ever human. I didn't press for details. In turn, I told him about the rejection, about Sebastian's cold efficiency in choosing dominance over whatever we'd had, about the pack that had turned away so easily, as if 3 years of my life among them had been practice they could simply discard. He was a fool, Rowan said flatly. He was practical. Alphas need strong mates for strong packs. I gestured vaguely at myself, not that. You're here. His voice was sharp. You survived rejection, left pack territory, claimed a cabin on the edge of cursed woods, and you're still standing. Most wolves would have broken within a week. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. But his words settled somewhere deep, finding cracks I'd forgotten existed and filling them with something that felt dangerously close to pride. On the 10th night, everything changed. I was preparing dinner, rabbit again, roasted with the wild herbs, when I heard the howls. Not the normal night sounds of the forest, but something organized, purposeful, a hunting call. And it was coming closer. I barely had time to douse the fire before they burst through the tree line. 5 wolves in their beast forms, massive and aggressive, their eyes reflecting torchlight from somewhere behind them. Sebastian's wolves. I recognized the lead. Marcus, his beta, all brindled fur and savage teeth. They shifted as they hit the porch, returning to human form with practiced ease. Marcus wore hunting leathers and an expression of righteous authority. The others flanked him, their postures aggressive, their wolves barely contained beneath human skin. Stella Winters, Marcus announced, his voice carrying the force of pack law. By order of Alpha Sebastian Clearwater, you are to return to pack territory immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. I left voluntarily. I'm beyond your borders. You're an Omega without pack protection, he interrupted, which makes you a vulnerability we can't afford. There are rumors of ferals in these woods, of things that steal wolves. Sebastian won't have your disappearance used as ammunition against the pack. Translation: I was an embarrassment, and they wanted me contained where I couldn't damage his reputation further by getting myself killed. I'm not going back. The words came out steadier than I felt. Marcus's expression hardened. That wasn't a request. 2 of his wolves moved to flank me, and my Omega instincts screamed submission. But I forced myself to stay upright, to meet Marcus's eyes even as my wolf whimpered, "Touch me, and you'll regret it." He laughed. Genuinely laughed. You think you can fight 5 trained pack wolves? You, a rejected Omega with no combat training and no... The temperature dropped. It happened so fast I almost missed it. One moment Marcus was reaching for me, the next he was airborne, his body slamming into the tree line hard enough to crack bark. His wolves spun, defensive positions, searching for the threat. Rowan stood in my doorway. He hadn't been there a second ago. I would have heard the door, felt the shift in air. But now he filled the space like a natural disaster contained in flesh, his pale eyes burning with something that made every wolf present instinctively lower themselves. She said no. His voice was quiet, conversational even, but underneath it ran a current of violence so absolute that Marcus's beta actually whimpered. This is pack business, Marcus tried, climbing to his feet. This is my territory. Rowan descended the porch steps with fluid grace, and I realized he was even larger than I'd thought, towering over Sebastian's trained warriors. These woods belong to me and mine. The cabin is under my protection, and she... His eyes found mine for a heartbeat, his mine to protect. The silence that followed Rowan's declaration felt thick enough to drown in. Marcus's wolves had gone completely still, their bodies locked in that terrible space between fight and flight, instinct warring with training. I could smell their fear, sharp and acrid, cutting through the night air like smoke. Marcus himself had gone pale, his eyes fixed on Rowan with the kind of recognition that spoke of old stories, warnings passed down through pack lines. "You're one of them," he breathed. "The Thornbound." The name hung in the air like a curse. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle tightening that made him seem even more dangerous. "Leave. Now." "While I'm still feeling generous, the Alpha will hear about this," Marcus said. But he was already backing toward the tree line, his wolves following with quick, jerky movements. "He'll come himself. Let him." Rowan's smile was a terrible thing, all edges and winter cold. "I've been here 60 years. I'll be here 60 more. Your Alpha is a child playing at power he doesn't understand." They ran then, shifting mid-stride and disappearing into the darkness beyond the marked trees. I could hear them crashing through undergrowth long after they vanished from sight, their retreat graceless in their panic. I stood on the porch, my heart still racing, trying to process what had just happened. Rowan remained where he was, tension slowly bleeding from his frame as the forest settled back into its normal rhythms. "Thornbound?" I finally asked. He turned to face me, and in the moonlight his features looked even sharper, more inhuman. "A name packs give to things they fear but don't understand." He moved back toward the cabin, and I noticed for the first time a slight limp in his gait, as if one leg pained him. "You should go inside. Lock the door." "Why?" I challenged, some reckless part of me refusing to cower. "You just claimed I was under your protection. Are you going to hurt me?" "No." The word was immediate, absolute. "But you should be afraid of me anyway." "I'm not." It was true, I realized with some shock, standing there in the darkness with a creature powerful enough to send 5 trained warriors fleeing in terror. I felt safer than I had in months. Maybe safer than I'd ever felt with Sebastian, who'd worn his dominance like a costume while Rowan simply was. He studied me for a long moment, something almost like pain flickering across his face. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Stella Winters. Probably both," I admitted. "Are you going to tell me what Thornbound means?" "It's a long story. I have time." Another pause, then he gestured toward the cabin. "Inside. If we're doing this, you need to be warm." The fire had gone out during the confrontation, but Rowan rebuilt it with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and precise. I watched from the old chair I'd salvaged and cleaned, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders against the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. When the flames were crackling steadily, he settled onto the floor across from me, his back against the stone hearth. In the firelight, I could see scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing his arms and disappearing beneath his shirt collar. Stories written in damaged flesh. 70 years ago, he began, his voice low. There was a pack called Thornridge. They controlled most of these territories, ruled by an alpha named Nathaniel Frost. Strong pack, prosperous. Until they decided prosperity wasn't enough, they wanted dominance over every wolf in the region. He stared into the flames as he spoke, and I wondered if he was seeing the past there, watching it burn all over again. They had a weapon, an old magic, forbidden, that could bind wolves to their will. Turn alphas into servants, omegas into... He stopped, jaw tight. "It didn't matter what you were before. After the binding, you were theirs. What happened?" I whispered. "Some of us fought back, 7 alphas from different packs. We formed a resistance. We thought we could destroy the magic, free the bound wolves, restore balance." His laugh was bitter. "We were young and stupid and thought righteousness would be enough. It wasn't." "No." He held up his hands, and I saw dark marks on his palms, symbols like the ones carved into the trees. But these were burned into his skin, permanent and pulsing faintly with their own light. The magic we tried to destroy, it shattered. Pieces of it embedded in each of us. We survived, but we were changed. Too dominant to integrate back into normal packs. Too volatile to be trusted. The magic made us stronger, but... He closed his fists. "It comes with a price." "What price?" "Control." The word came out harsh. "The magic wants to be used." It whispers constantly, telling us how easy it would be to bend others to our will, to take what we want, to rule the way Thornridge tried to rule. Every day is a battle not to become what we destroyed. I thought about the way he'd sent Marcus and his wolves fleeing with barely a word, the raw power that had rolled off him in waves, and he was holding back, always holding back. The other 6, I said. They're fighting the same battle, every day. We stay here, in the dead woods, because the forest itself has old magic that helps contain what's inside us. The marked trees, they're warnings, but they're also wards. They keep us in as much as they keep others out. That's why the cabin was built here. For Omegas who needed sanctuary from packs, you gave them a place where the magic couldn't reach, where we couldn't reach, he corrected. The boundaries work both ways. I can't cross into the cabin's grounds unless invited. None of us can. And yet he'd crossed them tonight, when Marcus tried to take me. How did you... You invited me in, weeks ago when you kept talking to me at the tree line, when you accepted the offerings without fear. The magic recognizes intention. His eyes met mine. It knows the difference between violation and welcome. My throat went dry. All those evenings talking to him, learning about the forest, sharing stories about our pasts. I'd been lowering the boundaries without even knowing it, inviting something dangerous into my space because it wore a face I'd come to trust. You could have told me, I said. Would you have believed me, or would you have thought I was trying to manipulate you? He shook his head. The truth doesn't always set you free, Stella. Sometimes it just gives you new cages to fear. He was right, I realized. If he'd told me all of this that first night, I would have run screaming back to Clearwater territory and begged Sebastian to take me back, pride and dignity forgotten. But now... Sebastian will come back, I said, changing the subject because the alternative was examining why I wasn't afraid when I clearly should be. Marcus said he'd report this. The Alpha won't let it stand, having one of his pack claimed by... I stopped, unsure how to finish. By a feral cursed with stolen magic? Rowan's smile was sharp. No, he won't, which means you need to make a choice. What choice? Stay here, under my protection, and accept what that means. Or return to your pack before this escalates into something that can't be undone. He stood, moving toward the door with that slight limp I still didn't understand. Sebastian will give you one chance to come willingly. After that, it becomes a territorial dispute, and those always end in violence. I don't want to go back, I said quietly. There's nothing for me there. Then you'll need to learn to defend yourself properly. Marcus and his wolves were scouts, a test to see if the rumors about you were true. Next time, Sebastian will bring his full force. He paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the darkness outside. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'll introduce you to the others. You should know what you're aligning yourself with. After he left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the forest sounds that no longer seemed quite so threatening. Somewhere out there, 7 alphas fought daily battles against magic that wanted to twist them into monsters, and I'd stumbled into their sanctuary with nothing but 50 coins and a broken heart, somehow earning the protection of the most dangerous one. My mother's voice echoed again. We bend, but we don't break. Maybe it was time to stop bending entirely. Morning came wrapped in fog so thick I could barely see the tree line from the cabin windows. I found breakfast on the porch, fresh bread, still warm, and wild berries arranged in a wooden bowl I'd never seen before. The bread smelled incredible, yeasty and rich, and I wondered which of the 7 had baking skills. I ate slowly, watching the fog shift and swirl like living things dancing between the trees. When Rowan appeared, walking out of the white wall as if the mist itself had granted him permission, I was ready. The others want to meet you, he said without preamble. They're curious about the Omega who isn't afraid of ferals. Should I be afraid of them? Probably. But there was something almost fond in his expression now. They're not as controlled as I am. The magic affects each of us differently, and some handle it better than others. We walked into the forest together, Rowan leading the way along paths I couldn't see but that he navigated with absolute certainty. The fog thinned as we went deeper, the marked trees becoming more frequent, until they formed a corridor of warnings on either side. Eventually, we emerged into a clearing I would never have found on my own. The settlement was larger than I'd expected. 7 structures of varying sizes arranged in a rough circle around a central fire pit. They were built from the forest itself, incorporating living trees into their architecture, so that it was hard to tell where construction ended and nature began. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and I could smell cooking meat and something herbal, medicinal. 6 figures waited by the fire. They were all alphas. I could feel it in the way the air itself seemed to bend around them, in the dominance that radiated like heat. But unlike Sebastian's performative authority, these wolves wore their power like weapons they'd learned to sheath, but never forgot how to draw. The closest was a woman, tall and lean with silver blonde hair cut brutally short. Her eyes were the color of amber, and when she looked at me, I felt assessed and catalogued in an instant. "So you're the one causing all the excitement." Her voice was rough, like she didn't use it often. "I'm Vera. I hunt." "Everything she says sounds like a threat," said the man beside her with an easy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-20s physically, though who knew how old he actually was. Dark skin, darker eyes, and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "I'm Jasper. I keep these assholes from killing each other." "He tells jokes," Vera said flatly. "We tolerate him." The others introduced themselves in turn. Elena, who had haunted eyes and gentle hands, who grew the medicinal herbs and kept their small community healthy. Darius, built like a mountain, who rarely spoke, but whose presence felt solid and unshakable. Finn, quicksilver fast with copper-red hair, whose fingers never stopped moving as if stillness itself was painful. And finally Soren, oldest of them all, with white hair and a face carved by time into something beyond human beauty, terrible and transcendent. "Welcome to the island of misfit alphas," Jasper said, sweeping an arm dramatically at the clearing. "We hunt, we brood, we fight against eldritch magic trying to turn us into supervillains. The usual." "Jasper," Rowan said warningly. "What? She should know what she's getting into." But Jasper's grin softened as he looked at me. "Seriously though, Stella, you don't have to stay. Rowan's protection extends to helping you find sanctuary somewhere else. Somewhere safer." "I don't want somewhere else," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "I want to stay." Soren stepped forward then, and I understood why he was the eldest. The magic in him burned brighter than the others, visible in the way shadows clung to him like living things. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made my wolf want to bow. "Then you need to understand what that means. Sebastian Clearwater will come for you. Not because he wants you back, but because he can't afford to look weak. When he does, there will be violence. I know." "No," Elena said gently. "You don't. When we fight, the magic fights too. It's not clean or controlled. People die, Stella. Sometimes people we don't mean to hurt." I looked at each of them in turn, these 7 alphas who'd sacrificed their place in normal wolf society to contain something that wanted to consume them, who'd built a sanctuary for rejected omegas, even though it meant isolating themselves further, who offered protection knowing it might cost them everything. "Then teach me," I said. "Teach me how to survive when he comes." They taught me in the way wolves have always taught, through practice and pain and the kind of patience that only immortals could afford. Vera took me first, leading me deep into the forest where the trees grew so thick that sunlight became a memory. "You're an omega," she said, circling me like I was prey she hadn't decided whether to eat. "That means you'll never match an alpha in raw strength, so we don't teach you to fight like an alpha." She moved so fast I barely saw it. One moment she was 3 feet away, the next her hand was at my throat. Not squeezing, but present. A threat made tangible. "What do you do?" My wolf screamed to submit, to bare my throat, to accept dominance. I shoved the instinct down and drove my knee upward, aiming for where I hoped vulnerable things still mattered on creatures like her. Vera twisted aside easily, but she was grinning when she released me. "Good. Submission gets you killed or controlled. Neither are acceptable outcomes." She beckoned me forward. Again. We drilled for hours. She taught me to use an opponent's strength against them, how to target joints and soft tissue, where to strike to disable rather than just hurt. My body collected bruises like badges, each one a lesson learned. Alphas expect omegas to fold, she said during a water break, her amber eyes reflecting the filtered light. Use that. Let them think you're submitting, then go for the eyes. Bite if you have to. There's no honor in survival, only survival itself. Jasper taught me differently. He focused on evasion, on reading body language and scent markers to predict attacks before they came. You're small and fast, he said, dancing around me like a shadow given form. That's not a weakness. It's your greatest advantage. Make them chase you into terrain you control. He set up scenarios, ambushes, surrounded positions, pursuit situations. Each time I failed, he'd reset and make me try again, adjusting variables until I understood the principle beneath the practice. Unlike Vera's brutal efficiency, Jasper made survival feel almost like a game, something you could win through cleverness rather than force. The magic wants us to dominate through power, he explained one afternoon as we rested. But there are other kinds of strength. Sebastian's wolves, they're trained for pack tactics, overwhelming force. They've never had to think creatively because they've never had to. You will. Elena taught me the forest itself, which plants could poison, which could heal, how to read the marked trees not just as warnings, but as a language that spoke of safe passage and hidden dangers. She showed me caches they'd hidden throughout the territory, supplies stored in waterproof containers, and buried beneath specific landmarks. If things go wrong, she said softly, her haunted eyes meeting mine, you need to know how to survive alone. We can't always be there, and the magic... She trailed off, fingers touching the mark on her palm. Sometimes we're the danger, Stella. Remember that. The days blended together in a rhythm of training, eating, recovering, training again. My body adapted, grew stronger. The omega softness that Sebastian had found inadequate transformed into something leaner, more dangerous. I learned to move through the forest silently, to track by scent and sound, to read the subtle signs that meant predators, both natural and supernatural, were near. But it was the evenings with Rowan that changed me most profoundly. He didn't teach combat like the others. Instead, he taught me stillness. The magic responds to emotion, he explained one night as we sat by the cabin's fire. Fear, anger, desire. These things make it stronger, harder to resist. You need to learn how to be calm even when everything inside you is screaming. How do you do it? I asked. Stay controlled when the magic wants you to take what you want? His eyes found mine, and the intensity there made my breath catch. I remind myself what I'd become if I'd let it win, what I'd lose. His voice dropped lower, who I'd hurt. The air between us felt charged, electric. I'd noticed the way he watched me during training, the tension in his shoulders when Vera's lessons got particularly rough, the careful distance he maintained, as if afraid that touching me might shatter whatever control he'd built. Rowan, I said carefully, that night with Marcus, you said I was yours to protect. What did you mean? He was quiet for a long moment, shadows playing across his sharp features. The magic recognizes bonds. Pack bonds, mate bonds, blood bonds. When you invited me across the boundary, when you kept choosing to stay despite knowing what I am. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. It formed a connection, not a full bond. You'd have to accept that consciously, but enough that the magic sees you as mine to defend. And if I wanted more than defense? The question hung between us, dangerous and impossible to take back. Rowan's expression shifted through several emotions too quick to name, before settling on something that looked like pain. You don't know what you're asking, then tell me. The magic doesn't just want me to protect you, Stella. It wants me to claim you, bind you, make you mine in every way that matters. His hands clenched into fists, the marks on his palms glowing faintly. It whispers that you're meant for me, that an omega as strong as you deserves an alpha who can match that strength. And part of me... He stopped, jaw tight. Part of me wants to listen, my heart hammered against my ribs. Why don't you? Because you deserve choice, real choice, not influenced by magic or circumstance or the fact that I'm the first alpha to see your worth. He stood abruptly, moving toward the door. Sebastian rejected you, but that doesn't mean you should settle for a cursed feral who has to fight every day not to become a monster. You're not a monster, I said, standing too. You're the only alpha who's ever treated me like I was worth protecting rather than tolerating. That's a low bar. Maybe. I crossed the space between us, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, to see the way his pupils dilated despite his rigid control. But you still cleared it, and I'm not asking you to claim me or bond me or whatever the magic wants. I'm just asking you to stop pretending you don't want to. For a heartbeat, I thought he might close the distance, might let himself have what the magic, and possibly his own heart wanted. Then he stepped back, and the shutters came down over his expression. Get some rest, he said quietly. Sebastian will make his move soon. You need to be ready. He left before I could argue, disappearing into the night, and I was alone with my racing thoughts and the realization that I'd somehow fallen for a cursed alpha who was too noble to take what I was offering. 3 days later, Sebastian came. I woke to the sound of wolves howling. Not the hunting calls I'd grown accustomed to, but challenge cries, formal and aggressive. Dawn light filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. When I stepped onto the porch, I found Rowan already there, positioned between the cabin and the tree line. The other 6 stood with him, forming a wall of alpha dominance that would have sent any sane wolf fleeing. But Sebastian had never been accused of being sane when his authority was challenged. He emerged from the forest with 20 wolves at his back, his entire fighting force, all of them armed and armored in hunting leathers. Sebastian himself wore the trappings of his position, the silver torque of pack leadership, ceremonial marks painted on his arms, every inch the alpha he'd been trained to be. Marcus was there too, standing at his right hand, his face still showing the bruises from where Rowan had thrown him into the trees. Stella Winters, Sebastian called out, his voice carrying the weight of pack law and generations of tradition. I come to offer you one final chance. Return to Clearwater territory willingly, and all will be forgiven. Your rejection will be forgotten, and you'll have a place among us. As what? I called back, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Your charity case? The Omega you keep around to prove your magnanimity? Something flickered in his expression. Maybe regret, maybe just irritation. As a member of the pack, that's more than you have here, living among ferals and cursed magic. She has more here than you ever gave her, Rowan said, his voice cutting through the morning air like winter wind. She has respect. She has choice. She has a place she's earned rather than begged for. Sebastian's eyes fixed on him, alpha to alpha, and even from the porch I could feel the weight of their dominance pressing against each other. You're Rowan Thornbound. The stories say you and yours destroyed an entire pack. The stories are incomplete, Rowan replied. We destroyed a pack that was enslaving wolves through forbidden magic. Some might call that justice. Some might call it murder, Sebastian gestured at his assembled warriors. You claim sanctuary here, but these woods sit on the border of my territory. That makes any Omega within them subject to my authority. The dead woods belong to no pack, Soren said, stepping forward. His white hair seemed to glow in the dawn light, and shadows writhed at his feet like living things. They existed before the packs, and they'll exist long after. Your authority ends at the marked trees. Then we'll drag her across them, Marcus said, and several of the warriors behind him growled agreement. The temperature dropped sharply. All 7 of the Thornbound went very still, and I realized I was seeing what they normally contained. Raw power barely held in check. Magic that wanted to be unleashed. The marks on their palms blazed with cold light, and the forest itself seemed to lean away from them, trees bending in a wind that didn't exist. You can try, Vera said softly, and her amber eyes had gone cold enough to freeze blood. But understand, if you start this, we finish it. And we've had 70 years to learn exactly how to kill wolves efficiently. Sebastian's warriors shifted nervously, their courage wavering in the face of something their instincts screamed was predator rather than prey. But Sebastian himself stood firm, his jaw set in that stubborn way I remembered. She's Omega, he said. She needs pack protection. Whatever you are, whatever you've convinced her of, it doesn't change her nature. And that's when I understood. This was never about me specifically. It was about the principle. An Omega choosing exile over pack membership undermined everything Sebastian's leadership represented. If I could survive, even thrive, without them. What did that say about pack bonds and alpha authority? I stepped off the porch, moving past Rowan despite his growl of warning. I walked forward until I stood between the two groups. Omega facing down 20 warriors and an alpha who'd once held my heart. "You're right," I said to Sebastian. "I am Omega. My nature is to bend, to submit, to find my place within pack hierarchy." I let my eyes sweep across his assembled wolves, meeting each gaze. But my nature is also to survive, to adapt, to find strength where others see weakness. I turned slightly, indicating the 7 alphas behind me. "These wolves offered me something you never did. Not charity, not tolerance, but genuine sanctuary. They taught me to fight, to hunt, to defend myself. They gave me choice, Sebastian. Something you took away when you rejected me in front of the entire pack. I did what was necessary. For you," I interrupted. "You did what was necessary for your image, your authority, your perfect pack structure. But necessity doesn't erase the fact that you threw me away because I wasn't dominant enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't enough." I felt tears prick my eyes but refused to let them fall. "Well, I'm enough now. Not because you made me, but because I chose to be." Sebastian's expression had gone carefully neutral, but I saw the calculation there. He was weighing options, considering consequences. "If I leave her here," he said slowly, addressing Rowan now, "other packs will hear about it. They'll question whether Clearwater is strong enough to protect its members. Some might see it as weakness." "Then they'd be fools," Rowan replied. "It takes more strength to let someone go than to cage them out of pride." The standoff stretched, tension pulling tighter with each passing second. I could feel the magic building in the Thornbound, see Sebastian's wolves preparing for violence, and knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Then Sebastian did something I never expected. He lowered his head, not in submission. An alpha never submitted, but in acknowledgement. "You've chosen your path, Stella Winters. I hope it leads you somewhere better than I could." He looked at Rowan. "Keep her safe. If I hear she's come to harm, you won't," Rowan said simply. "That's a promise." Sebastian nodded once, turned, and walked back into the forest. His warriors followed, their confusion evident, but their discipline holding. Within minutes, they disappeared completely, and the forest began to settle back into its normal rhythms. I stood there shaking, adrenaline crashing through my system, barely believing what had just happened. We'd been seconds from violence, from death, and somehow words had been enough. Rowan's hand touched my shoulder gently, and I turned to find all 7 of them watching me with something that looked like respect. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," Jasper said. But he was grinning, definitely both. I managed, and felt laughter bubble up despite everything. The weeks that followed Sebastian's retreat felt like learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. The constant tension I'd carried since the rejection began to ease, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. The Thornbound settlement became as familiar as the cabin. I learned which structure belonged to whom. Vera's was sparse and weapon-filled, Jasper's cluttered with books and odd mechanical projects, Elena's overflowing with herbs and growing things that shouldn't survive in the forest's perpetual twilight, but somehow thrived under her care. I learned their rhythms too, how Darius would disappear for days on patrol, returning silent and solid as the mountains. How Finn couldn't stay still, his restless energy expressed through constant motion, whittling, pacing, hunting. How Soren would sit for hours staring at nothing, wrestling with magic that burned brighter and demanded more than what the others carried. And Rowan. I learned Rowan most of all. He still maintained distance, that careful space between protection and possession. But the walls were cracking. I'd catch him watching me during training sessions with an intensity that had nothing to do with technique. When I'd return to the cabin each night, I'd find small things. Firewood arranged perfectly, the water pump working smoother than before, a new latch on the door that actually locked properly. Acts of service, I realized. The way a wolf courted when words felt too dangerous. 1 month after Sebastian's departure, the first snow fell. It came early that year, transforming the dead woods into something from a winter tale, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The marked trees stood out sharper against the white, their symbols seeming to pulse with cold light. I woke to find the cabin's small garden, herbs I'd been cultivating with Elena's guidance, buried under 6 inches of powder. When I stepped outside to assess the damage, I found Rowan already there, building a makeshift greenhouse frame from bent saplings and salvaged glass. "You don't have to do that," I said, wrapping my cloak tighter against the cold. "I know." He didn't look up from his work, his breath misting in the frigid air. "But the valerian root you planted will die if it freezes. Elena says you have a gift for growing things." Something warm bloomed in my chest. "She told you that?" "She tells me lots of things." He secured another piece of glass, his movements precise despite the cold. "Mostly about how you've integrated into the settlement better than any of us did when we first came here, how the others actually smile more when you're around, how Jasper's jokes are funnier and Vera's edges seem less sharp. And what do you think?" He finally looked at me then, those pale eyes catching the weak winter sun. "I think you've made this place feel less like exile and more like home." His voice dropped lower. "I think I've been a coward, keeping distance because I was afraid of what the magic might make me do. And now? Now I'm more afraid of what I'll regret if I keep pretending I don't want you." He set down his tools, standing to his full height, and the intensity in his gaze made my knees weak. "The magic will always be there, Stella. Always whispering, always tempting. But you make me want to be stronger than it. You make me want to be the alpha you see when you look at me, instead of the monster I'm afraid of becoming." I closed the distance between us, my hand finding his, fingers tracing the marks on his palm that glowed faintly at my touch. "You're not a monster. You're just someone who's been fighting alone for too long." "I'm 70 years old," he said, but there was something almost vulnerable in it now. "I've done terrible things in the name of containing this magic. I've hurt people, Stella. Killed when I should have found another way. The curse doesn't make me innocent. It just makes me dangerous. I know." I did know. Had learned enough from the others to understand the blood on all their hands. "And I'm choosing you anyway, not because I think you're perfect or safe or easy, but because you've given me something no one else ever did, the space to become who I was meant to be." His free hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his harsh exterior. "If we do this, if I claim you the way the magic wants, there's no going back. You'll be bound to a cursed alpha, forever marked as belonging to the Thornbound." "Good," I said simply. "I don't want to go back." He kissed me then, and it was nothing like the careful, controlled touches we'd shared before. This was hunger held back too long, finally given permission. Desperation wrapped in tenderness, 70 years of isolation meeting someone who saw the wolf beneath the curse and chose him anyway. The magic surged. I felt it in the way the air sparked between us, in the marks on his palms that burned cold bright against my skin. But instead of the domination I'd been warned about, it felt like completion, like 2 pieces of a whole finally finding each other across impossible odds. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. "The bond," he said roughly. "Do you accept it? Freely, without coercion or magic compelling you?" "I accept," I whispered. "Do you?" "I've accepted it since the day you walked to the tree line and demanded to know my name." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his features into something almost heartbreaking. "I accept, Stella Winters. I claim you as my mate, my omega, my choice above all others." The bond snapped into place like a physical thing, and suddenly I could feel him, not just emotionally, but as a presence in my mind, steady and strong and absolutely, irrevocably there. The magic surged through the connection, but instead of overwhelming me, it settled, as if having me anchored it somehow gave it purpose beyond just destruction. From the settlement, I heard howls, celebration, recognition, acceptance. The other 6 had felt the bond form, knew what it meant. The winter that followed was the happiest of my life. Rowan moved most of his belongings to the cabin, though he kept his space in the settlement for when the magic grew too strong, and he needed distance to wrestle it back under control. Those times were hard, watching him struggle, knowing I couldn't help beyond being there when the worst passed, but the bond meant he was never truly alone in the fight, and gradually the episodes grew less frequent. I learned that having a mate who'd lived 70 years meant a partner who actually understood patience, who knew how to be still and present, who valued quiet moments as much as passionate ones. Rowan courted me with the slow deliberation of someone who knew time was a gift rather than an enemy. The settlement became truly home. Vera taught me advanced combat techniques, nodding approval when I finally managed to pin Jasper during a sparring match. Elena and I developed new healing compounds, combining her knowledge with instincts I didn't know I possessed. Even Soren, remote and burning with magic, would sit with me sometimes and talk about the years before the curse, about the wolves they'd been when the world was younger. Spring came late, but when it arrived, it brought changes. A young Omega appeared at the mart trees one morning, thin, scared, her clothes torn and her wolf barely held together. She'd run from a pack that had tried to force her into a mating with an alpha twice her age, had heard whispers about a sanctuary in the cursed woods where rejected Omegas could find safety. We took her in, gave her Elena's old room in the settlement, fed her, let her heal. Her name was Maya, and watching the 7 deadly alphas become impossibly gentle around her fragile presence made me fall in love with all of them a little bit. "This is what we built it for," Rowan told me one night, as we watched Maya laugh at one of Jasper's stories, the first real joy we'd seen from her. "Not just for you, though you were the first brave enough to stay, but for every Omega who needs a place where they can be themselves without fear. We'll need more cabins," I said thoughtfully, "if word spreads that the Thornbound actually protect rather than harm. Then we build more cabins," his arm tightened around my waist. "We have the time and the purpose. Besides," he pressed a kiss to my temple, "you've already started drawing up plans. I've seen the sketches." I had been planning, dreaming of what the sanctuary could become. Not just a place for Omegas to hide, but a community where wolves who didn't fit traditional pack structures could thrive, where strength was measured in survival and compassion, rather than just dominance. That summer, we built 3 more cabins. Finn and Darius did the heavy construction, while I designed layouts that would give privacy, but allow community. Maya helped, her confidence growing with each nail hammered, each wall raised. By autumn, 2 more Omegas had found us. Siblings who'd lost their pack to a challenge fight and had nowhere else to go. We welcomed them, and the settlement expanded again. The other packs noticed, of course. We'd catch scouts at the boundaries sometimes, watching, reporting back. But Sebastian had set a precedent, and none of the other alphas were willing to challenge the Thornbound over Omegas who'd chosen to leave. Some even started sending wolves to us. Problem cases, they called them. Omegas too independent, too questioning, too unwilling to accept traditional hierarchy. We took them all, and each one added something new to our growing community. 2 years after I'd bought the cabin for 50 coins, the sanctuary housed 15 Omegas, and the 7 alphas who'd decided their curse could be a blessing if aimed correctly. I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set through the marked trees that no longer felt like warnings, but like promises kept. Rowan emerged from the forest where he'd been running patrol, his wolf form massive and silver-touched in the fading light. He shifted as he reached me, pulling me into his arms with the easy affection of someone who no longer feared his own strength. "What are you thinking about?" he asked against my hair. That I bought a broken-down cabin for everything I owned, and somehow ended up with a home, a family, a purpose. I turned in his embrace to face him. That being rejected was the best thing that ever happened to me. Sebastian was a fool, Rowan said, as he had so many times before. Maybe, I agreed. But his foolishness gave me you, gave me all of this. I gestured at the settlement, where lights were beginning to glow in windows, where I could hear Jasper's laughter and smell whatever Elena was cooking for dinner. "I don't think I'd change it, even if I could. The magic is still there," he reminded me quietly. The curse doesn't just disappear because we've found purpose. We'll always be fighting it. I know. I touched the mate mark on my shoulder, the mirror to the one on his. But you're not fighting alone anymore. None of you are. From the main settlement building, someone called that dinner was ready. Maya's voice, stronger now, confident. She'd become something like a coordinator for the newer arrivals, helping them adjust, teaching them what we'd learned about surviving outside traditional pack structures. "We should go," Rowan said. But he didn't move, just held me there in the twilight as the dead woods settled into their evening sounds. "I love you, you know, not because of the bond or the magic or any supernatural reason. Just because you're you, stubborn and brave and foolish enough to see past curses to the wolves beneath. I love you too," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. My alpha, my choice, my home. We walked to dinner together, and I thought about the girl who'd arrived here with nothing but 50 coins and a broken heart. She'd been so afraid, so uncertain of everything except that she couldn't go back. She'd been right. There was no going back, only forward, into a future she'd built from rejection and hope, and the audacity to believe that sometimes the strongest thing an Omega could do was survive on her own terms. The dead woods weren't cursed, I'd learned. They were just honest about what they contained. Power and danger and 7 alphas who'd chosen to be better than their darkest impulses. And now they contained something else too. A sanctuary where the rejected could become the strong. Where Omegas learned that bending didn't mean breaking. And where a woman with pale hair and a stubborn heart had finally found the place she was always meant to be. The cabin that cost 50 coins had bought me everything that mattered. And when the first snow fell that winter, covering everything in pristine white, I stood on the porch with Rowan beside me, and 15 other wolves who'd found their way to Sanctuary, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The pack bonds I'd mourned losing had been replaced by something better. Chosen family, earned respect, and love that didn't require me to be anything other than myself. I'd bought an old cabin on the edge of cursed woods, and I'd found what no alpha had ever dared to touch: freedom, purpose, and the courage to write my own ending. And it was perfect.